Welcome to my read aloud of Achilles, The Making of a Hero. If you want to pick up your own copy of the book, be sure to check out my link in the description where you can get a paperback copy such as this. It's also available on Kindle. For this time, we are reading Prologue, A Dark Night. A quiet, still darkness covered the seaside palace. Lit torches sent dim, dancing splashes of light across the polished stone floors, as if flaming specters surrounded the grounds, bringing the night to life from mischievous shadows dancing across the exposed marble. The moist, hot air smelled of the sea, damp and salty. Even in the middle of the night, the air felt hot and sticky, with no cool breeze to offer relief from the humid heat that still radiated off the stones. No living soul seemed to be on guard along the palace walls or gates, only the continuing flicker of torches. Were it not for the few lit torches, there would not appear to be any life in or around the palace, just an abandoned ghost left to the slow decay of time. Silence in the night was only occasionally interrupted by the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks far below. As hard as the raging waves pounded against the rocks, the sea salt spray was never quite able to make it up to the palace walls. The palace was built up on a cliff and protected on three sides by rough seas and razor-sharp, jagged rocks. 1,000 bronze-clad soldiers could hold the stronghold for years against an endless siege due to the narrow bottleneck of land any invading force would have to go through to reach the palace. Enemy soldiers would simply get peppered by defensive barrages of arrows as they tried to cover the only safe path to the polished palace walls. This made the palace a formidable stronghold for a people strong enough to hold it when they were awake. It was a strong marble castle made by strong, hardened men. This was the home of the king of Murudum, one of the fiercest of all city-states in Greece. Even Spartan warriors knew not to get tangled in conflict with Murudum, and the Spartans were never ones to withhold their own violent fury from raining down upon people who happened to get in their way. It was said that the founding of Murudum was blessed by mighty Zeus himself, wanting to raise a prosperous people who would become some of Greece's most prestigious warriors. You would not know this castle home such a warrior elite, given the current stillness of the night. The night's rest was interrupted when an eternal creak split through the calm silence. A large door burst swiftly open. A shadowed figure slipped through the opening and slammed the door shut just as quickly as it had been opened. No one to see, no one to hear. The world continued with its ignorance as the stranger moved unmolested through the palace grounds. It must be now. This may be the only chance I have to do what must be done. Gods, give me strength, the veiled stranger thought as she continued sneaking through the palace. You cannot tell by the bundle of rags that she had draped over herself, but she certainly moved with a feminine grace, as if gliding instead of running. Once through the outer door and into the palace, the shadowed woman was found in the great hall. It was a long stone corridor, its walls adorned with marble statues depicting warriors clad in battled armor and holding weapons such as bows, swords, and javelins. Torches along the hall sent splashes of light against the frozen legion, causing their flickering shadows against the walls, making it seem as though they were moving, keeping silent vigil over the dark figure continuing to move into the center of the great hall. It seemed as if they knew this stranger, and that she was not welcome and should not have been there. Their blank stares still managed to fill with judgment and suspicion. The rough homespun brown tunic covering up the stranger who moved further into the hall, passing the immovable guards stationed as sentinels along the way. As if floating, the stranger continued to glide along the smooth floor with a grace that suggested there was much more to this shrubby character than could be initially seen. That walk, or glide, told you that something beautiful and unique was being hidden away underneath the dirty and tattered coverings. Once at the center of the large hall, the shrouded woman stopped, removing the hood of her tunic. Her hair draped down past her neck and into the back of her rags. Years of salt water had damaged her hair, tinting it green and clumping it into dreads and kinked tangled knots. Despite that, her hair was still beautiful, as if stylized to look sea-swept. Torchlight revealed a soft, young face. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, still only a girl. Yet her eyes did not appear to be the eyes of a young woman. They were blue, deep blue. The kind of deep blue a person could drown in if they looked too long, and just before you reached the bottom, you would see the shade of green that added a mystic, otherworldly look to her face. Looking into those eyes, you knew they had seen and experienced more than a lifetime's worth of hardship, trials, and moments of joy. Those eyes held wisdom and understanding. Forgive me for what I must do, the woman thought, her eyes darting all over the great hall with obvious trepidation. Surely it is the only way, the only thing that will save him. How else could any mortal face such trials? The woman threw back the remainder of her tunic and revealed a bundle of rags she was clenching tight in one arm. With both hands, she slowly and carefully placed the bundle onto the ground, as if the contents were both fragile and precious to her. Being laid gently on the ground, the rags parted to reveal a sleeping baby wrapped cozily among the fabric. With the baby quietly sleeping, the woman stood, leaving her own discarded tunic to reveal the green flowing gown she was wearing. Looking back at the baby, the woman smiled with her full pink lips, though the smile did not seem to reach her piercing eyes, which carried a sad concern within them. This must be done, little one. It must be done because I love you, and because the world has need of great heroes, the woman said quietly, obviously not wanting to disturb the baby's peaceful sleep any longer than she had to. Do you really think it is up to you to decide who should be destined to become a hero of Olympus? A soft, warm voice echoed out of nowhere. The woman's head shot up like a startled deer at the sound of an approaching hunter. A man was standing beside her. She jumped back in surprise, crouching down to protect the still sleeping baby if needed, like a lioness ready to protect her cub. The man had not been there an instant ago. He had a sneaky smirk on his face as if he was enjoying a private joke. He had an almost boyish face, much too young for the aged creases that sailed across his cheeks and forehead. Like the woman, though, he had eyes that did not belong to a young man. His brilliant green eyes were clear and electric, even in the dim firelight, burning like emeralds. His head was layered with long golden locks. He was dressed in a simple white toga draped over his right shoulder. The man's crackling eyes would have been his most shocking feature if it were not for his shoes. He was wearing seemingly ordinary sandals, though they were laced with golden cord that wrapped up his calves almost to his knees. The extraordinary thing about them was the little pair of wings on each heel that appeared to be gently flapping up and down. Not only that, but this man was floating. He stood at least 3 inches off the ground, so that he was taller than the woman he was standing or floating next to. The woman seemed to calm herself and replace the shocked look on her face with one of suspicion. She was obviously not scared to find a strange man floating in the air next to her. Her lips thinned as she spoke. Hermes, the lackey of the gods, are you here to steal away my child? I am flattered that you would come yourself and not simply send one of your many shadowy followers. Now, Thetis, his smirk widened, revealing dimples under his eyes. Is that any way to speak to a god? You really ought to mind your manners better. You are lucky I'm not as moody as one of my, family members. Hermes' eyes glowed dangerously bright in the flicker of the torch flames. Thetis, which was indeed her name, certainly knew that gods could be temperamental. She was determined in her cause. She needed to protect her child, and she knew this was the only way. Despite that, she knew Hermes was right, and she doubted she would have been so bold if Olympus had sent Ares, the god of war, or even Zeus himself to intervene. But in front of Hermes, the god of thieves and messengers for the other gods, she felt more confident. You gods are all so arrogant. State your business here and then depart. You have no influence over me, and I must complete my task before, well, I simply must finish it. Her voice began to tremble as her eyes moved from Hermes to the baby, still sleeping in its bundle of rags. Her resolve wavered slightly, causing her to fear if the very act of talking about her task any longer would drive her to no longer be able to do it. I am not here to commit theft, but rather to relay a message from the gods, my dear. It is not for you to interfere with the fate of this child. No immortal is to interfere with the life of a mortal. Hermes' face took on a serious look, as though he was now getting to business. No matter how honorable they think their intentions may be. Not interfering in the life of mortals? Don't make me laugh, the woman spat back at Hermes, anger filling her eyes. How often are the gods fathering or mothering children with mortals? How many times has a god lashed out at a mortal out of jealousy or anger, or simply because they were bored? The history of mankind is written through the intervention and interference of the gods in their lives. Hermes frowned. Only sorrow and grief will come from what you are attempting to do. You are affecting not only this child's life, but the lives of thousands who will suffer because of this decision you have made. The gods will not directly intervene to stop you, but they implore you to abandon your task. If you are done, then leave me. I must do this for my child's sake. I will leave, for my message has been delivered. Heed these words, for in that day when this grief and sorrow has reached even your own heart, I will visit you again and remind you of these words. With that, Hermes began to glow, a gold aura shining around him. A hole of light opened up above his head and spilled bright illumination into the hall. Hermes lifted up and flew into the bright chasm, disappearing as he went. Once Hermes was gone, the light dimmed and the portal vanished, leaving the woman once again alone in the great hall. I must do this. No risk is too great, the woman whispered to herself as she gently stroked the cheek of the still sleeping baby. She smiled as she looked down at the child who had remained asleep during the encounter with Hermes. In the presence of a god, and yet you still sleep, you truly are destined for greatness. But will it be enough? With that, her smile faded, and she turned her eyes to the ceiling, and she raised her hands, outstretching her arms above her head. With her eyes closed, she began to mutter a chant. A breeze whipped into the great hall. The torches on the wall flickered, sending the shadowed warriors into a fevered dance. The wind picked up, finally blowing out a couple of the torches, plunging the center of the hall into darkness. As the chanting continued, it began to echo through the hall, seeming to vibrate the very walls. Any more chanting, and the pillars holding up the ceiling in the great hall were sure to begin crumbling, when suddenly the wind stopped, as did her chanting. A dead silence filled the room, thick as a morning fog. After what seemed like an eternity, the silence was finally broken by a loud crack, as the stone floor in front of the woman and the baby split in half and spread open, as if an earthquake was taking place, yet none was. The opening in the floor oozed an acid green glow around the room. The light seemed to reflect off the woman's eyes, making them almost glow in the dark. At the heart of the unnatural glow emanating from the crevasse was a fast-moving river of water. The water looked black as tar, though you could hear it churn and gurgle as it flowed under the stone floor, coming from some unknown source and continuing on to a place just as mysterious. The woman's eyes brightened further as she gazed into the depths of the black water. Her eyes moved down to the baby. She bent over and picked the child up gingerly into her arms. "Life is so short, little one," she said with sincere affection in her eyes. "Mortality is a weakness saved for the lowliest of beings. Yet, my child, a moment of suffering can raise us above such limitations." A tear rolled down her cheek as she removed the child from the rags. It began to move and coo as it woke up. The woman grabbed the baby by the left foot and let it hang over the rushing water. The baby began to scream and cry from the shock of being hung upside down and woken from its sleep. "Please don't cry, young one. Understanding will come in time. In the blink of an eye it will all be over, and in another blink we will be together, and I will explain all." The woman grimaced as she lowered the baby towards the water, acid green light shimmering off its writhing body. Just before the child's fingertips touched the ominous surface, a boom, boom, boom came thundering from the great hall. "Open up in the name of King Peleus!" A shout came through the door as the booming continued. The door splintered inward as a large battering ram came crashing through the solid wood that made up the gateway. The woman hesitated. She knew it was now or never. She must complete her task if there was any hope. As the wood continued to splinter, the woman gathered her courage and plunged the screaming child into the water. The water hissed and boiled around the child's body as it writhed and struggled against the woman as she continued to hold it under the water. Soldiers swarmed into the hall, brass swords drawn at the great hall's door, finally exploding open. The battering ram flew on the floor as they entered. They moved directly to the woman and grabbed her by the shoulders as she continued to submerge the infant. The woman and the child were raised by the soldiers, the child brought out of the water screaming. As the infant left the water, the crack in the floor immediately closed and sealed itself back up as if it were never there. A young soldier picked up the rags on the floor and gently took the baby away from the woman, wrapping it back up and trying to calm it down as it was screaming so loudly and fiercely. 2 soldiers on either side of the woman held her firmly and her arms pinned to her side. Without saying a word, they turned her around to face the broken down door. Standing in the doorframe was a tall, broad-shouldered man with disheveled golden shoulder-length hair. He had a thin beard softening his hard chiseled features. The torchlight lit up his eyes, and they burned as though on fire. He was dressed in a rich purple robe and emanated a royal presence. "Peleus," the woman half whispered as tears welled up in her eyes. "Thetis, what have you done?" The king was nearly shaken with anger as he entered the room. "What have you done? Our son! Where is our son?" "He's right here, my lord," the young soldier started as he took a step forward and held out the bundle of rags. "There was a crack in the floor, something evil, my lord. There was an unnatural green light and, well, she was holding the child and whatever was there under the floor." The soldier trembled as he spoke. King Peleus took the bundle from the soldier and unfolded the rags. He let out a gasp as he looked down on his son, who was now quiet but shaking in the king's arms. "Thetis, what is this evil you have done? Our own son! How could you do this to our child?" Peleus looked at the woman. He looked betrayed and hurt, as though his heart was breaking. The soldiers continued their tight grip on her arms as Thetis shouted, "It had to be done, Peleus. You do not know the road the gods have chosen for our boy. It is better this way." "I should have you killed for this, by the gods. You could have killed my only son." "Peleus, you know better than any that you can't." "Enough. I loved you, Thetis. You are my son's mother, and it is for that love's sake that I will spare you. But hear me now." The fire in Peleus's eyes blazed and burned with a greater intensity with each word he spoke. "You are banished from the kingdom of Meridium. I do not want to see you again. You will stay away from our son. This is the mercy I will bestow upon you, because of the love we once shared." Tears fell down Thetis's cheeks, but she stood up straight and gave off a sense of confidence, so much so that she began to glow in the dim light. "I will honor your command to leave, even though I know it is short-sighted and will eventually bring you nothing but grief. Though I will not stay away from our son. He will come to know me in time, and you will be thankful that he does. All I have done here tonight I have done for him." With that, Thetis really did begin to glow. The soldiers holding her let go and backed away, fear filling their faces. A bright flash blinded the king and his soldiers. When the flash subsided, Thetis was gone, and in her place was a puddle of water on the floor. "My lord, what—" one of the soldiers began. "Silence, all of you!" Peleus spat at the 3 soldiers. "Thetis is gone, and she will not be returning. She has been banished, and this is all that is to be said of this evening. Now go fetch the healer. He will most likely be sleeping in his chambers. Be quick!" The soldiers straightened themselves up and rushed out the hall to wake the healer. Once they left, Peleus's shoulders dropped. His face drooped, making it appear he had aged 20 years in a matter of seconds. He dropped onto the floor with the child still shaking in his arms. Peleus looked around the great hall. He looked at the statues along the wall, and then his eyes moved down to the puddle on the floor. His eyes continued on down to the tiny body wrapped in rags lying on his lap. The infant's body was bright red and covered with blisters. Peleus looked down on the poor baby's body. It was covered with intense red flesh, all except for the left heel, where Thetis had been holding the baby. "You are so strong, my boy. My poor boy," Peleus whispered to the child. "My poor Achilles." Well, there you go, the end of the prologue. Check out my next videos as we go on to chapter 1 from here and onwards. And again, if you're interested in grabbing your own copy of the book, be sure to check out my link in the comments. Also, if you want to continue following, be sure to like and subscribe this video so you can stay on top of my read-alouds as I continue to go through Achilles, the Making of a Hero. So hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you did in the comments. And I look forward to seeing you at my next video. Thank you.